Well, hello. Wow, this is good, isn't it? We've got quite a few more people now that I've done a bit more. Let's bring that back a bit. Now that I've advertised it a little bit. So, how are you all doing? Don't worry, I'll move this. I'll go back a bit when you have to see. Oh, what's that on the screen? All right. I'll move back a little bit when you want to see what my hands are doing and that. So you just have to put up with my big head for a little while. So what we got here now? So we've got about 145 people in. That's pretty good. Cool. Oh no, more 150. It keeps going up and down. That's weird. So this is going to be a bit of a reading workshop. I've been meaning to do this for a little while, and I'm going to cover quite a bit of stuff. So I'm going to cover the basics of reading, just the absolute getting started stuff. And then I'll give a few more tips more about sight reading and that, the kind of stuff that some more intermediate players might want to know. So I'll be covering that a little bit later. So I'll just wait for a few more people to come in before I start. Let's have a see who we've got in here. There we go. We've got all the old faves in there. And we've got a pretty good selection, actually. It's pretty worldwide. I think this is a pretty good time for doing it, don't you? East Yorkshire. Sacramento, California. So we've got a few West Coast people in, which is pretty good. Ontario, Canada. But it's cold up there right now, isn't it? Cold and wet Cumbria, yeah, but it's been raining here today as well. Not that I'm anywhere near Cumbria, but love Mark Space have the Squire version of that one. Yeah, this is a Fender Precision. This is my I love this one. This is this is probably one of my favorite bass actually. Well, for certain things, obviously, but it's just in terms of a P bass, it's just got a really good feel, and I love this. It's been stripped, so I really like the texture and look of it. It's a 1982 Precision, and it's got Nordstrand pickups in it as well that I've sort of modded it, so it's pretty good. It's got a lovely rasp on the top, that kind of snap. That one's coming up next on Friday. People have been asking about Deantown for ages, so I've got a big lesson on that coming up on Friday. So I won't spoil it, but that's what's coming up. By the way, is the sound okay? Let me know if you can't hear anything. Bass, Vox. I'm sure you'd have all said something by now. Yeah, this is a pretty good time. 290, and that's pretty good. See, it makes a big difference when you actually send out emails in advance. We've got quite a few in now, haven't we? So I'll get started. Now, I'm hoping that this is all going to go well, because I've actually, just with the software that I'm using for doing this live stream, I've actually got quite a few little pop-ups to use. And I'm hoping that I've organised them correctly. So you'll have to bear with me if any of it goes wrong. I was actually going to do this live stream on Monday, but as some of you know, I actually ended up in the hospital this weekend. So I couldn't, I could have done it, I think, but I just didn't want to risk it. It wasn't anything bad. I just had what seems to be one of those silent migraines. Just got like funny vision and everything, but ended up in A&E. But, everything seems fine. Thanks for the well wishes from the people over at the Facebook group and that. So hopefully a lot of this stuff that I'm going to cover in terms of reading is going to be useful to you during all these lockdown weeks or months or years or whatever it's going to be. And a lot of you are trying to practice or get more practice in than you would have normally. And reading is one of those things, because it takes quite a bit of spade work at the beginning. There's a little bit of a hump that you have to get over. But once you've got over that hump, it's actually a lot easier. But because of that little hump at the beginning, it's one of those things that when you've got some time on your hands, that you can put some real, put some work into that, into the fundamentals of it, so that then, when you want to do some practice of it a little bit later on, it's not such a slog. So, so hopefully this is all going to be really good stuff for you. 328, it's going up. It's going up, everybody. Maybe we'll hit 1,000. Cool. Okay, so. Right, so the first thing that I'm going to show you is a very straightforward kind of bass line, okay? So this is just going to be written, and I'm just going to show you this first of all, and this is going to point out a few aspects of reading, okay? And it's not on there. It's on there. So, on that, that graphic that you can see there, what we've got is a stave, or staff. That's the 5 lines that you see, and I'm just going to quickly run through the basic aspects of what you get on written music. So you've got the 5 lines there with the spaces in between, and those lines and spaces all correspond to a different note. Okay, so we'll get to that in a minute. So obviously each one of those, I'm guessing most of you know that anyway. Then we've got the clef at the beginning, that little kind of C shape kind of thing that's there with the little colon. That's the bass clef. That tells you that it's what the notes are going to be on that stave. And if you're usually going to be playing something written for bass, then it's going to be there. And then we've got a time signature there, 4/4. That 4 over the 4. So that tells us there's 4 quarter note beats in that bar, or 4 crotchet beats in that bar. So just think of it as a fraction, 4 quarters. Okay, and then you can see those notes on there. And don't worry, we'll get to what those notes are going to be in a minute. But that's just a bunch of quarter notes. So when you see that little filled note head, that little round note head with the stem, each one of those is a quarter note. So you see 4 of them in each bar. And obviously the bar line there, that's dividing up each of those groupings of 4 quarter notes. Okay? So that's the absolute basics of the stuff that you see. And I'm guessing that most of you probably know that already. Anybody that's played any other musical instruments will probably know that much. So let's have another look at some of the stuff that we've got in there. So let's move on to the stave. Okay, so there we go. We've got the 5 lines that I talked about. So you'll sometimes see that called a staff as well. So that's the stave. And then next up, we've got the bass clef. Now, remember how I said it was the bass clef? You can see there on that bottom line that there's it's working around that kind of second to top line there. Now, that note there is an F. So we know that when the clef's there, that bass clef, we know that note is an F, and that's why it's sometimes called the F clef. Now, you can also see just above there that we've got a few other clefs. There's the treble clef, there's the bass clef, you can have alto clefs, tenor clefs, there's all kinds of clefs. And those clefs tell you what the notes are on those lines and spaces, because they can always be different. So the bass clef, we know that there's an F there on that second to top line. Now, this is the sort of most important thing for most of you, is what the notes are there. So you can see there with the bass clef and the stave, we've got the notes from that bottom line working up. We've got G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Okay? And you can see where those notes are on a bass guitar on the fretboard there. So you can see there's the low G there, and I'll just work through these again without this on the screen. So we had the G, the bottom line there. So if you were to take the G, as in 3rd fret of the E string, that's that bottom line on the bass clef. Okay, so it's that one down there, G. Okay, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. When you get to that A, 2nd fret of the G string, that's that top line. So The bass clef, the notes on that stave, they kind of occupy this lower area pretty well. We've got just that set of notes. We don't have the E and the F. I'll come to those in a second. And we don't have the B and the C. They're above. But, that's a nice, the money area that everybody talks about. The low area there, these good old bass notes down here. They're all pretty much there on the clef, which is why that clef's a good one for this instrument. So, what we also need to know is where the notes are on the, where this E and the F are going to be. Now, I think, let me just go back here. I've got the time signatures. I'll just show you the ledger lines, okay? So, ledger lines, okay? So, above and below the bass clef, can you see those little lines that you've got there? Those little telegraph poles, and you've got some underneath there as well. So you can see there that when we come down, G, F, and E, E there is on that little temporary line. So that's our open E. So you don't have to worry about any of those other ones unless you're playing a 5-string. But there's the E, the ledger line below the stave, and then you've got the F there, the space below. Then if you move further along that line, you can see there that the beyond the A, we've got the B, C, D, E, F, G, A, and it just keeps going up. So we just add those temporary lines whenever we want the extra notes in there. So above that A, we've got a B, that'd be the space above the stave. Then we've got the C, that's the first ledger line up. The D, next space. E, 2 ledger lines up. F, next space. G, 3 ledger lines up. And we just keep going. So that's what the notes are, right? So now then, let's move back a little bit. Now, one of the problems that people have when reading music on a bass guitar, and a guitar, to be honest, is that there's a bunch of different places where you can have any one note. So if I move back a little bit, open G string, okay? Just playing the open G string. So that is the top space on the bass clef, right? So it's the space above the top line. But of course, we've also got this G here, which is 5th fret of the D string. And that same G we've got here at the 10th fret of the A string. And again at the 15th fret of the E string. They're all the same note. And this happens all the time. A, we've got the C. It's we get these repeats of these notes, and because of that, it can be a pain in the ass when you're actually trying to read music, because you look at a note like that, let's say that C, the ledger line above, and you think, well, do I play it there, or do I play it there, or do I play it up here? Where do I play it? You've got choices to make. And when you're reading music, especially if you're sight reading music, you don't want to be making those choices, because it takes too long. I mean, if you've got time, you can sit there and work it out and do all of that stuff. But think about it. Even if you had time, you've got time to work it out, eventually, once you've got pretty good at reading, you're still going to have that choice to make. Once you're reading, let's say that you're a brilliant sight reader. Once you look at a note like that, a C, you've still got to make that decision. Where am I going to play it? It doesn't make, your level is completely irrelevant. There's still a choice to make, and that's what makes it difficult reading on fretted instruments. On a piano, middle C is middle C. There's no options. You don't have to make any choices. It's just there. So any kind of instrument, any string instruments where there's a tuning, you've got to make these decisions. Now, how do you get around that? Well, this is where learning to play in positions comes in. And it's that kind of... by the way, sorry, because I know there's a lot of questions in the comments. I'll come back to those once I finish this little, webinar kind of thing. So, where was I? So, when you think in terms of positions, it takes all of those choices out of the equation. So, I'll show you what I mean by this. So, I'm not going to cover key signatures because that's a whole rabbit hole that we could go down. So we're just going to be looking at notes in the key of C. Now, in the key of C, so key of C, C major scale, that's the palette of notes. there's no sharps or flats. Okay, so it's just C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So we don't have to worry about key signatures. We don't have to worry about sharps and flats. So if we're just looking at the notes of C, just the standard natural notes, well, if we take this first position down here, you know, roughly around this, from the 2nd fret up to the 5th fret, let's say, or 1st fret up to the 5th fret, just around that area. Ignore the open strings for now. We've got that C there, and it just so happens that we can play the good old common scale fingering for the C major. So we can find all of the diatonic, all of the natural notes in that area, first of all. So I'll just run through them just to give you an example. So if I start on an open E, then, because obviously there's no other options for the open E, so I am including that open string. Then an F there, then G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay? 1st fret, 3rd fret, 5th fret on the E string, then 2nd fret, 3rd fret, 5th fret on the A string, 2nd fret, 3rd fret, and 5th fret on the D string, 2nd fret, 4th fret, 5th fret on the G string. That's all of those notes of C major, or the standard natural notes, no sharps or flats, in that area. So I class that as a position. Now, different people think of positions in different ways. I personally just think of pretty much 2 positions on the neck, and then I kind of move between them. So I have that position that I've just shown you, that one, and then, okay, so that is a movement of position. Now, I'll get to that in a minute, why I do that. Now, let's just stick with this first position. Now, the first thing to do is learn what those notes are on the stave, which I'll also come to in a minute. But that's the notes that you want to get down, just what those notes are there. Now, why don't I use the open strings? Well, I do use the open strings, but just later on, if I'm ever teaching sight reading, I'll use this set of notes first. Because when you use the open strings, again, you've got these choices to make. Because A and A, which one do you use? Now, there are good reasons for using the open string. You might want to, you know, move position. There's a whole load of different reasons why you might use an open string. But just in terms of being strict with a particular position, that A there is the one in this position. And I find that this position gives us a really good spread of notes. So I don't use the open strings, I just use that 5th fret there, okay? And that's what I stick with for quite a while. So we've got that set of notes. So next thing we need to look at is how to practice those notes. Now, don't worry about rhythm for now, okay? You want to divide this up, okay? You want to think in terms of pitch and rhythm and practice them both separately. Then you can put them both together. And this is really, really vital with this. So I'll show you an example of this. So if I go to the pitch reading test. So there we have, you can see the stave there. It's in 4/4. Now don't worry about the rhythms for now, because each one of those notes, it's called a whole note. Each one of those lasts 4 beats. So just as an example, I'll just play the first 2 bars. So that first note is a G, that's the bottom line. I play it for 4 beats. So I play it and hold. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we've got an E, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's all it is. Okay? So what we want to do now is concentrate on one string. Okay? That's all. Okay? You don't want to start, you know, trying to figure out what all of these notes are on all of these strings. Just stick with one string. So, E, F, G, and A. That's the notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 notes, okay? Now, we know that the E, the open E, is that ledger line below the stave. And then we've got the F, the space. And then G is the bottom line. And A is the bottom space, okay? So, that reading test that I showed there, that pitch reading test, that is simply for the E string, okay? Now, I'm just going to play through this just to give you an example, because this is, I perform these tests whenever I'm teaching anybody, and in the Simple Steps to Sight Reading course that I have over at Talkingbass, I've got these reading tests for every string, every position, all keys, everything, okay? So, taking rhythm out of the equation. So, I'll just count through as an example of how this would work. So you don't need a metronome or anything. You can just count in your own time. So I'm going to count in with 1 bar of 4/4. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, G, 2, 3, 4, E, 2, 3, 4, G, 2, 3, 4, F, 2, 3, 4, A, 2, 3, 4, G, 2, 3, 4, F, 2, 3, 4, E, 2, 3, 4, A, 2, 3, 4, E, 2, 3, 4, G, 2, 3, 4, A, 2, 3, 4, E, 2, 3, 4, A, 2, 3, 4, F, 2, 3, 4, A, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's an example of a pitch reading test. So all you have to do, I mean, obviously, for a lot of you that are non-readers, even that would be too difficult at this point. So it's vital that you find out what each one of those notes are on that E string, E, F, G, and A, just in that first position. Find out where they are on the stave, so you familiarize yourself with that, and then you do the tests, and do them slowly. You know, I was doing it fairly quick for an absolute beginner there, so I might play 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, you know, that kind of tempo. And as soon as you play the first note, you want to look ahead. That's absolutely vital. So, you know, you play, so let's say we're on the E, 2, as even when I get to 2, I'm looking at the next bar and working out where that next one's going to be. So you're always looking ahead. And it doesn't matter how good you are at reading, that will always be a part of what you do when you're reading. You're always looking ahead. Okay, you always want to be ahead of where you are. That's why sometimes I've got to say, there's been times when I've been doing reading gigs where it might be quite tricky reading and it's going by quite quick, and it's like sight reading, not you know, never rehearsing it or anything, just pure sight reading. And if you're reading it, and let's say that you've, I don't know, just had a meal before you're going on stage or something like that, something that makes you feel a little bit like, oh, if you're not on it when you're sight reading, you can't look ahead as well. So you try looking ahead, and you just get these dulled senses where you just can't look ahead. So even when you're doing this professionally, whatever it is, the most important thing is to be looking ahead, and this gets you used to that. You know, 1, 2, looking ahead. 4, 2, looking ahead. Okay, so few other things with this position. Now, one of the things that you might notice is when you're playing in this low area here, it's quite a bit of a stretch. Now, one thing you don't really want to be thinking about is got to have 1 finger per fret, you know, like this. Yes, you're going to be thinking of 1 finger per fret for a lot of it in terms of which finger you might use, but you don't have to think about stretching it at all. So I would say in going for something like that, in terms of just those 4 notes, because remember, that's all we're looking at, E, F, G, and A. When you look at those, put your hand in a position where the second finger is pretty much over that G there, that 3rd fret. Stick it there, right? Then just relax your hand. Now, for some people with big hands, you might have this kind of stretch, right? So you might be already in position for that A. You know, you'll have the first finger over the F sharp. You know, your 3rd finger might be there over the A flat. So you're in this position. Some of you might not. Some of you might have smaller hands. Your stretch might not be as much. But if you've got that second finger there, that's kind of your pivot point, right? So then so let's say we play that G. Let's say the next note's an A. Well, remember, we don't want to be looking at the bass. We've got to get used to reading off the music, basically, off the page, the screen, whatever it is, right? So when you go to look at the music, you can't be thinking, there's an A, there's an A, find the A, you can't be doing that, because you're just going to lose your place in the music. That's the one thing you don't want to do. So what you have to do is get used to finding these notes under your fingers without looking. Now, with those 4 notes, E, F, G, and A, it's really easy with the open E, obviously. You don't need any hands, so you just play the E. Okay, so that's one of them taken care of. Now, remember what I said. I had that second finger over the G. So that one's taken care of if we're in position, right? So the only 2 that we have to think about really is this A and the F. Now, the F is something that you really want to get used to doing just naturally, just being able to feel it almost like knowing that it's there near the nut. So the F, you just want to get used to being able to see it and just know what that position feels like, okay? But then you want to be able to come back to this G. So it's worth practicing not looking at the bass and just getting used to what that feels like to move from F to G. Now, you don't have to stretch like this. Just get used to what that movement's like. First finger, second finger. Just get used to that movement. Moving back and forth, right? And then do the same thing with the G to the A. Now, my hand's in position there. My stretch is okay, so I can just put the finger up and down. But for some of you, might not be so easy. So you want to get used to what that feels like. So that way you can move between the F and the G and then the F and the A. Now the only other sort of permutation on that would be F to A, which again is one that you need to get used to. But think about it. If you're used to that F to G, really you can pretty much in the right position for the G to the A. You know, that you shouldn't have to move that much for that. So really all you have to think about is the same distance of movement from the F to the G for the F to the A. It's not much different. It's just that you're using the fourth finger. So that move is very similar in terms of hand shifting to F to A. There's not much difference. You might have to move a little bit more, but remember you're going for it with the fourth finger. So that's probably about as tough as it gets technically when you're starting reading, just because you find it hard to actually, get the notes without looking. If you're up on the A string, we've got the B, C, and D, okay? Second finger, third finger, and, second fret, third fret, fifth fret, B, C, D, okay? Well, again, if you put that second finger over the C, easy to just pivot a little bit just to get the D, and the B is easy, okay? So just keep that second finger around that third fret, and that position in terms of the key of C shouldn't be too bad. Again, E, F, G, you can just take one finger per fret with that, and like I say, you don't have to stretch one finger per fret, you're just thinking of one finger per fret. You can move the hand as you see fit, okay? Now bear in mind, once you get good at sight reading or whatever, just reading in general, you don't have to think of it like this. You can move the hand around all over the place. It doesn't matter. This is just getting those fundamentals there just so that you can get by, right? So that's the position that we're looking at. So I'm not thinking of the open strings for good reason. I don't want you making choices, okay? And this position that I'm mentioning gives us a wider range of notes. So we get the open E all the way up to that C. We've got the ledger line below the stave all the way up to the ledger line above the stave. So, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That's quite a few notes, all in one position. If you were just using the open string, that position becomes... I suppose you can make it up to the B there, but I prefer it being up here, okay? And that covers a lot of different songs. You could learn to sight read fluently in that area and really be able to get by with a lot of songs. To move up to here, the D, the E, the F, the G, you don't use those that many. You don't use those too much in a lot of songs. It's going to be more for fills or perhaps a little bit of a different feel. They do get used, obviously, but like they say, the money notes, they're down here. So that was the E string. So now let's have a look at the A string. So I'll just switch. So we'll go to the A string. Okay. So these notes we've got B, C, and D. So B. That first note that you see there on the whole page, that's a B. So it's that line there. Now don't worry about memorizing them straight away. Obviously, it takes time. But that's the B, and then that next note that you see on that space, that's the C. Okay, and then the next line up, which is 4 bars in, would be the D. Okay, so this time we've only got 3 notes to think about. You've got a 1 in 3 chance of getting it right from the start. So we've got B, C, and D. Okay, so I'm just going to show you what this example's like. I'll just go through the first stave. So 1, 2, 3, 4. B, 2, 3, 4. C, 2, 3, 4. B, 2, 3, 4. D, 2, 3, 4. C, 2, 3, 4. D, 2, 3, 4. C, 2, 3, 4. B, 2, 3, 4. So again, I'm doing this pretty quick, and like I say, you could be 1, 2, as slow as you need to go. Don't try rushing it. If you find it too difficult, you need to slow it right down. So that was the notes B, C, and D. So that means that now, just from covering those 2 strings, E, F, G, and A, those 4 notes there, and then B, C, and D, we've pretty much covered a full octave, because the next note up is E. We're back where we started from, an octave up. So that's quite a few notes we've taken care of there. So this is how I deal with this. This is how to practice reading right at the start. Now, I'll just give you a little bit of a background to this and the reason I came up with this. This isn't original, in terms of the way that you do it. But I taught myself to read pretty much. I already had a little bit of reading ability because I used to play organ before I played bass. But it doesn't matter. You can have played any instrument that you want. Violin, trombone, whatever it is, piano. A lot of reading stuff is related to muscle memory. So you can, I've had this quite a lot with, trying to read on guitar and on piano. You can know how to read a particular clef, like bass clef, right? And then you try switching to a different instrument and then reading that clef on the other instrument. And it just completely throws you. Like, I can read treble clef on guitar, but I can't read bass clef on guitar very well. But I can read bass clef on bass, but I can't play treble clef as well. It's because what happens is that you get muscle memory for where those things are. So I've said this many, many times, and I talk about this a lot on the sight reading course. But you cannot be, you don't have the time to be saying, seeing a note and then saying, okay, there's a C, find a C, there's a C, play the C. You just don't have time to do that. So you've got to work out that when you see that note there, the C, okay, so I'm talking of C, second space up from the bottom. When you see that C, it needs to be that graphic that you see, that note, equals that fret there, okay? That's what it becomes eventually. Like, if I'm reading something on stage, I'm not thinking about the notes at all. I'm thinking about rhythms most of the time and form, The notes you need to get rid of that pretty quickly. Anybody that, any of you that have tried reading for any amount of time will realize that, the notes become kind of second fiddle to the rhythms. Let me just check if everything's going okay. All right, okay. I thought there might have been a problem with the sound. So you need to build up this muscle memory. Now, when I very first started reading on bass, I'd had a few pieces that I wanted to work out. Let me just move this over here a touch. Is that right? Yeah. When I first started reading, I'd been playing about 3 years, and I was pretty technically okay. So I was really into Billy Sheehan and Stu Ham, and I was playing all these metal bands, and I was playing all this fast stuff, and so my kind of physical side of playing kind of developed fairly quickly. But not my reading side. I wasn't that good at all. I couldn't, I couldn't read. I couldn't walk. There was so many holes in my playing. But I could whittle. So when I tried learning how to read, I found that every time I asked for advice from other instrumentalists, they'd always say, "Oh, you just got to read, man. You just got to read. Just read more. Just read." I thought, well, that's all well and good, but I'm a beginner reader. But I think a lot of other instrumentalists don't realize how bad we can be as bass players. You can get bass players that are damn good. That you would think those dudes are out there, just like really good, but their reading ability might be terrible. So, but you talk to a pianist or something like that that's like a very, almost a beginner, and they might talk to you and they'll be able to read music, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, you've just got to read. You just start reading." I thought, no, that's like telling a child to read when they can't read, saying, okay, how are we going to teach this child how to read? Okay, give them give them a book. It's like, well, you got to learn the words first. You got to learn the letters. You got to learn the words. And, there's a whole set of steps before you can open a book and fluently read through it. So that's kind of how I felt at the start. It was like I couldn't get in reading bans with my ability. It was, and the problem is, and I'm sure a lot of you feel this way, that you might have been playing for years, 20, 30 years, but you can't read. And so going to learning to read means that you've got to become a beginner again, like an absolute beginner, just like as if you've never touched the base, because that's the stuff that you're going to be reading. Those little reading tests that I just showed you. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. You might be playing, Rush tunes, and then you've got to sit there just going dum dum. It's really, really, bad for your ego, So that's what I had to do. I thought, right, I'm going to have to start from scratch. And I thought, okay, I could maybe get 2 notes and learn to read those 2 notes on their own. Forget about the rhythms. So I just started setting myself random sheets, random tests, like those notes that I showed you before, that example. I just wrote out those. I just get a sheet of manuscript paper, and any of you can do this, right? Just get those 4 notes, the E, F, G, and A, and just randomly write them out. And you'll even get a little bit of practice at knowing those notes by actually writing them out. So you just write out as many as you can on a stave, and then you just play through them just as I did. And then you just keep going until that E string is nailed, until you feel really confident with that E string. Because trust me, once you start trying to combine the strings, things start to get a little bit tricky. Because what can happen with reading is that you think, okay, E, and then you see that it moves up a note, and you think, okay, F. You're not really reading it in isolation, you're just knowing that it goes up 1 step. So you think E, F, and then if it goes up again, you think, oh, it's G, and then up again. It's a bit like reading a C major scale and just seeing that the notes go up. You don't have to read them, you just think, okay, we're going up. So you can end up doing that and relating everything back through the breadcrumbs. So you don't want to do that. You need to know them all in isolation, which is why these random note tests are really good, because you get really odd interval jumps in there that you might not get at all in a bass line. It's very idiosyncratic, but when you actually start reading them, what it does is it means that you have to read them in isolation. So let's have a look at the next one. So let's have a look at, this is the E and the A string. So this is a combination of both those strings. So remember we had E, F, G, A, B, C, and D. So I'll just very quickly just run through that first stave. So 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, F, 2, 3, 4, E, 2, 3, 4, B, 2, 3, 4, C, 2, 3, 4, A, 2, 3, 4, C, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So see how that works. We've taken the E string, the A string, learned them both separately, just absolutely got those down. And, in the sight reading course, I've got multiple pages of these tests, and you can just work through them at your own pace, just round and round and round and round until you get them. And then you combine them. And like I said, when you do combine them, and I think some of the people we have here in the comments are already doing the sight reading course, so they'll be testament to the fact that it can be pretty tricky when you move on to combinations of the strings. So you learn the E and the A string combined, and that might take you a couple of weeks until you feel really confident with it, and then you move to the D string in isolation, then the G string in isolation, and then the combination of those. Or you can try combinations of A and the D string, and then E, A, D string, A, D, G string, and then combination of all of them. And it just gives you loads and loads and loads of practice at just finding those notes. And eventually, you get a muscle memory for it. So when you see a G top space on the stave, you just think, I even want to play with the, with the 4th finger there. If I'm in that position, I just know it's there. If I'm A, bottom space, it's there. You know, C, ledger line above, it's there. F, you know, E, C, G, B, D. Each one of them, you have this muscle memory for it. So as you see it, there's just this little thing that pops off in your head where you think, okay, that. Instead of thinking C, D, G, B, C, D, I'm doing that kind of thing. Or E, okay, I know that's an E. Instead of any of that, it doesn't work like that. You just, as you see it, it sets off this little, just this muscle memory thing where you just go pop and just hit the note, okay? Because, like I say, you want to get the note reading side of it out of the way. If any of you think that sight reading is all about reading pictures, it isn't. It's about reading rhythms. Because think about it. How many notes did we have there in that first position? E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now, yeah, there's 12 keys to worry about as well. So we have to start putting sharps and flats in there. All right. Let's just say there's variations on that set of notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 notes. And the variations with the sharps and flats. But you can nail those pretty quick, you know, within if you're not bringing rhythm into the equation. So within maybe a couple of months, you might feel really, really at home with that position. So that, you know, because it's not a case of, oh, is that a G or is that G? It's not. It's like that is that, and it can't be anything else. Now, let's say that we even bring this position into play, and you learn what these notes are up here, and maybe even up here. Let's say all the notes on the bass, right? How long's that going to take to get those notes down? Not very long. You know, certainly not a year. I mean, it doesn't, especially with, you know, a lot of practice, the notes aren't the problem. There's an infinite number of different rhythms. And rhythmic combinations, and that's where it gets tricky. Okay? So, very quickly, let's just have a little look at rhythm. Now, here we have the most common rhythms, really, that we're going to be that you'll have to deal with. So you've got that first one there, the whole note. So I'll just play these, okay, and count them out as I play them. So I've got the whole note. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Whole note because it's for a whole bar of 4/4. Just think of these rhythms in terms of 4/4. Don't worry about thinking, oh, is that the whole note in 5/8? Don't worry about that. So a whole note, okay. Then half notes. They're half the duration again, so they're for 2 beats each. So if I was to play that bar, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, obviously, you don't go 1, 2, 1, 2 unless you're in 2/4. So you have to kind of get used to playing them and keeping your bearings while counting. Quarter notes. You're dividing the bar of 4/4 into quarters. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And look at the system that we have here. That whole note, there was no stem on there. It's just that round note. Then the next one, it looks like a whole note, but we've got the stem. So that's half the time again. Then we fill in the blank on the note head there. So that's for the quarter notes. Eighth notes, we've got 8 of those notes in a bar, so that's why we call them eighth notes. Okay, so we're dividing it up into 8, and notice how they're all beamed into groupings of 4. That's because in a bar of 4/4, we don't really want to be working well. You do this sometimes, but you want to have a clear division across the middle of the bar. It's for good reading, really, just in terms of keeping your bearings. So there we'd have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So we're counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then we've got 16th notes. So again, we add another beam in there. So that's 16 notes in the bar. So it's very, very logical how this works. Whole note, whole bar. Half note, divide up into half. Quarter, divided into quarters, 8th notes into 8th, 16th into 16th, and then you can go to 32nds, 64ths, 128ths if you really want to do it. You'll also see these in Europe, England, described as or labelled as semi-breve, then minim, then crotchet, and quaver, semi-quaver. That's how I learned them. So this is more the American way of doing it, which is actually way more logical. So then if I take that off and then bring up the counting, again, you can see the counting there. 1, 2, 3, 4, just for that whole note, just holding it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the minims there, or sorry, the half notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. Okay? Now, another little tip when you're getting into reading, and this applies to other parts of your playing as well. Keep that foot tapping. You could do it with your head as well. You can nod your head, but I'd advise you to keep your foot tapping because you use that as your reference point for when you're playing the actual rhythms. So you kind of get used to where things lie based on the foot. So whole notes you don't really have to worry. So if I'm playing a whole note, 1, 2, I'm tapping the foot there. So I'm going to nod the head instead of tapping the foot, but I am tapping the foot. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't really have to think. Half note, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, you learn where those notes fall based on the kind of visual look of what you're seeing. Then the quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 4. You get used to picking on each beat, on each foot. Okay? Then when you've got the eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and there's a certain amount of independence comes into play because you need to be tapping the foot. So I've got that head doing. And 1 and 2 and you've now got 2 for each of these. So you get used to that. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then obviously 16th note, 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 4 and. Now, it's when it comes to that kind of rhythm, consecutive rhythms, it's really, really straightforward. But when you get to dotted notes and rests and all those kind of things, that's when you really need to know where things lie relative to the foot. So if you, let's say you're playing, don't worry about what this is, but if you were playing a dotted quarter note and then an eighth note, which would sound like this, 1, 2 and 3, 4 and 1, 2 and 3, 4 and, okay? I'm playing on 1 and then the and of 2 and then 3. So 1 and then the and of 4. So 1, 2 and 3, 4 and 1, 2 and 3, 4 and. What you do is get used to where the foot is in relation to that. So 1, 2 and. Okay, so 1, 2 and. So you get used to the foot tap and then the note. 1, 2 and. 1, 2 and. So my head's kind of doing an up stroke. So 1, 2 and. Okay, you get used to the foot and relating everything to it. So when you start looking at 16th notes, when you get used to seeing eighth notes tied across bars, across the middle of bars and things like that, you get used to knowing where they are relative to that foot, so you can keep that foot consistent. You really want to build up independence between the foot tap and the voice, you know, if you're counting it, and then the actual, and then the playing. So that if you're playing, like I've got my foot tapping now. So getting used to being able to keep that foot tapping. And it seems like a really obvious thing, and it seems really easy on the face of it, you know, how I describe it. But just try doing it. When you first start trying that, if you're not used to it, it can seem really, really tricky. I only know that because... from talking to a lot of students when you're trying to teach them how to read, and they're trying to do that with the foot, and because they're trying to concentrate so much on reading, they find actually doing stuff with the foot really tricky. So that's a little bit about rhythm. Now, once you've learned how to do some pitches on their own and then some rhythms on their own, you can start to put things together. So what I'm going to do is, let's have a look at this. Where are we? Put it on here. Here's a really, really simple piece of music. Okay, so it's just 8 bars. All we've got in there are half notes and then a bar of quarter notes at the end, right? So in the Simple Steps to Sight Reading course that I've got, you would have already done a load of rhythm reading exercises. So I put a lot of rhythms together with rests and all that kind of stuff, and you just play them without any pitch. So we've got rhythms without pitch and pitch without rhythm in, separately. Then when it comes to combining them, it can seem quite tricky at first, but because we've got very simple rhythms in there, it won't be too bad. So first things first, let's have a look what we got. We've got bass clef, so we know it's bass clef. Then we've got 4/4, so we know there's 4 beats in the bar. And then that little curly thing that you can see at the beginning, that's a repeat bar. So have a look at the end of the 8 bars. You'll see that repeat bar again. So everything between those 2 repeat bars is repeated, okay? So this is a really, really simple exercise that once you've done the A and E strings, once you've played those exercise sheets a lot, you'll probably find this quite simple. So I'll just play through it and just to give you an example. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, oops, volume's off. 1, 2, 3, 4. C, 2, 3, 4. B, 2, 3, 4. A, 2, 3, 4. G, 2, 3, 4. F, 2, 3, 4. C, 2, 3, 4. G, 2, 3, 4. G, A, B, G, and then back to the beginning again, okay? So that was a really, really simple bass part. And on the face of it, it's like, of course, that's not too difficult to read. It's pretty easy. I'm telling you, a lot of bass lines look like that, okay? So, like, I've done a lot of reading gigs, and a lot of sight reading ones where you don't get any prep, there's no rehearsals, there's none of that stuff. They give you a pad of music and you play it. And I gotta say, especially in ones where there might be a lot of more traditional kind of music. I mean, obviously, if you're getting Chick Corea parts, it's going to be a completely different ball game. But standard tunes that people are going to give you kind of look like that. There's going to, they're obviously going to be a little bit more than that. But you see a lot of whole notes and half notes, and especially dotted quarter note, eighth note rhythms. You see a lot of that stuff. You're not always going to be playing. You're not having to read that stuff on professional gigs that often. A lot of it is just straight ahead bass stuff. So it doesn't take that long before you can actually try some bass lines that kind of make sense. And all we did there was read 4 notes on the E string, 3 notes on the A string, and then combined them. And then we looked at some very simple rhythms and then just applied them by combining them with some music. So very, very, very simple. Now, all of this I cover in the Simple Steps to Sight Reading course. I'm sure most of you know about that course already. It's like a huge course, and I mean a huge course. It goes from the absolute beginning, that stuff that I've just been talking about, all the way through to advanced. So, and there's another part to be added on later on this year, and then by the end of that, it will be because it goes up in levels. So there'll be 9 levels by the end of it. And once you get to level 9, it's all, tied, 16th notes, odd time signatures. There's a lot of stuff in there. Every key signature that you're ever going to encounter, and all the chromatic notes that you'll ever need to read. All of that stuff. So pretty much, if you can get to level 9 and play through the end exam kind of pieces, you should be pretty good for doing most gigs. Like most of them that you're ever going to have to do sight reading wise. So that's a really big course, and it's about, I don't know how many hours I've got on the course of video content now. It's a lot, but there's about 300 pages of lesson material, all the etudes and all that kind of stuff. It's huge. So I've actually put a bit of a sale on for that because I knew I was doing this today. I thought, just in case anybody wants to actually take a look at it, I've just put 30% off on the course today. So you can, if any of you are interested in learning to sight read, go check that out. And there's 30% off. So that should keep you going for the next 3 years in terms of reading. I mean, it'll keep you going for a long time. And let me just see in my notes, because that's the main bulk of the stuff I wanted to cover with the reading. Oh, yeah. One of the things I wanted to mention was, like, why would you want to read? Now, because I get asked that question quite a lot. Like, I don't want to be a professional bass player. I just want to play in a band, just playing whatever. What's the point of reading? Now, there are other benefits to reading besides learning to read. And I know that sounds a bit weird, but like when you would think that the main reason for learning to read, just like learning to read a book, is so that you can read more books, right? But it's not just that. When you learn to read, you learn the fretboard like perfectly. So think about those exercises that I was just showing. So in that bottom area there, just those two strings that we looked at in that first position, once you can do those reading exercises, you are never going to wonder again whether that is a D or not, or whether that's a B. You will know, and you will know to such a level that it's instinctive, that your finger just jumps there whenever you need to, if it jumps there because of what you see on the page, on written music, can you imagine how good that is when you're not under pressure looking at written music? So you learn all of these notes in here so that you will know them all, then in these higher positions and all the way up here. And remember that in terms of learning the notes on the neck, you only really have to learn them up to the 12th fret. Reading, you have to learn them past there. But in terms of actually knowing what the notes are, because once you know these, because that is the same as that, and that is the same as that. If you know that second fret marker there is a C, it means that you know that second fret marker past there is a C. That's the same as the open string, that's the same as that, that's the same as that, that's the same as that. So you only have to know the notes from there to there. Beyond there, it's all a repeat, right? So you learn the notes on the neck better than you would doing anything else. Since I developed my reading, I don't have to think about what the notes are on the neck. I know them all equally well. Then, rhythm. Think about what we were looking at briefly, just those little rhythms. It was only consecutive rhythms. I didn't get into dotted notes, I didn't get into rests or ties or anything like that. But what you do is you learn each of those rhythms as kind of rhythmic cells. So you learn these groupings of them. So you learn, let's take 16th notes for an example. If you learn that 16th notes are 1 E and A, right, for consecutive ones, then you start breaking them up. So that's 8th note, 2 16ths. Then 2 16ths, 8th note. So that's... Then 16th note, 8th note, 16th note. Okay? There's only so many permutations. It's all mathematical. There's only so many permutations of each rhythm, right? And then you combine them. So just with those 3 or 4 that I've got there. And then... And... If we combine them... So we get combinations of them. So that's where, it gets a little bit more in-depth, because you've got to combine them, you've got to learn how to put ties in there. But it's all pretty mathematical. You just go through exercises, just playing them in isolation, and then adding them together and doing all of that. So you become really good at knowing rhythms. You get a really good feel for where, how to keep your foot tapping, where you are relative to beat. How, whenever you hear a piece that's a little bit tricky to get down, you think, I can't really get that rhythm. If you know how to read, or you can notate it, you can just look at it and then just break it down into the individual subdivisions, and you will know how to do that visually. So it develops your rhythm really, really well. So reading is great for rhythm. It's really good for knowing the notes on your neck. So they're just separate, indirect things that you work on. And obviously, gigs. Who knows what's happening with gigs at the moment. But in terms of gigs that I've taken over the past, let's say, certainly over the past 11 years. No, what am I talking about? The past 21 years. No, 11 years. The past 21 years. The majority of those gigs have involved reading to either pure reading or reading at some point. And if you can read, you can take those gigs. Now, if you can't read, they're gigs you cannot take. Anybody that's a non-reader could not have done any of those gigs that I'm mentioning. Now, that could be anything from a theatre work to cruise gigs to, there's a whole bunch of stuff, like stuff that you might do in a studio. If somebody has got written music there and they don't have time to be messing around with rehearsals and all that kind of stuff, they want you to get it down quick. You need to be a reader so that you can just take the music, read it just like you would a book. And you might not have to sight read it all the time. It might be just that there it is, just learn it, and you can just, get it down a little bit over a few minutes. And then it just means that you're not having to sit there working something out by ear and taking a lifetime to kind of learn something and memorize it all when you can actually just read it on the page. Okay, so you get a lot of mileage in terms of gigs from reading, and it's just very, very good for your musicianship. So, lastly, before I start looking at all the comments, there are a few other things that I wanted to just made a note of that I wanted to mention. Oh no, I'd actually covered them in the rest of it. So that's it. So that's pretty much the workshop on reading. Now, I know that I've not covered everything, but just what I've covered there, just in terms of learning a string in isolation, learning the rhythms in isolation, combining them, all of that stuff, even though I've got a course, that does all of that for you so that you can work through it all, you can actually be, in terms of self-teaching, you can actually do that yourself, actually just making notes up on a stave, on some manuscript paper. You could print off some manuscript. I'm sure that you can find somewhere online some, maybe a PDF of some manuscript paper that you can print out. And you just write the notes out by hand and then just play through them. And even that is good for getting started, but it's all about taking tiny little steps. Every step that you want to take with it, you need to be thinking, this is easy. If you get to a stage where you're thinking, I'm not too sure, this is really hard, go back a step, right? At each point, you want it to be simple. And then as soon as you get good at this particular, let's say those notes on that E string, then move on. Then, if you try combining them and you find that too difficult, go back and practice them in isolation again. Take the time with it, okay? So that's my reading bit done with. So I'm sure that we've got 441 people in here. So I'm guessing we've got a ton of of people kicking about asking questions. So I'm obviously not going to be able to go back up through hundreds and hundreds of questions. So I'll just scroll up a little bit. Oh, thank you there. Double click is that's the, what's it called? Super Chat. $5. Thank you very much. So I'll just go up a little bit beyond that. And then if you've got any if there's any questions that you had that I don't answer that, that were further up, just let me know. Juan Javier, is it Javier? Martinez, halfway to finish level 5 by now. When will the third volume with levels 7, 8, and 9 be out? That will be sometime later this year. That's for the next course I'm working on. So I've just got the chords course out at the moment. I've just released that. So that's all about, chords. But the final volume of, just to let you know, the Simple Steps to Sight Reading course, it's in 3 volumes. Now, I've not done the third volume yet, but the first 2 volumes are available. Each volume has 3 levels in it. So there's levels 1, 2, and 3, and then 4, 5, and 6. So the levels 1, 2, and 3, that's kind of the beginner stage, and then the next one, 4, 5, and 6, they're a more intermediate level. But I would always say, definitely start at the beginning, even if you can read a little bit, because the things that I outline in terms of positions and just the whole methodology for doing it, you're better off starting at the beginning. And then, if you're already a good reader, you'll just get through some of the first examples quicker. And trust me, just because you're only covering half notes or quarter notes doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. Because there's a lot of rhythm, there's a lot of things you can do with ties and all that kind of stuff, and rests with just half notes and quarter notes that can make things quite tricky in terms of counting. So it's always worth starting at the beginning. Spider Slip says, question about the courses. In Mark's courses, he provides exercises. Are we expected to practice the exercise until it's perfect before moving on to the next lesson, or group exercises from multiple lessons? In the sight reading course, yes, I would say keep going with each exercise until it's kind of perfect. The other courses, not so much. You can kind of work through, and then you still have to be able to get the bulk of it. I just know that it's not realistic to expect everybody to just keep holding on a lesson before moving on to the next one, before waiting till it's perfect. I know that's unrealistic because people just will keep going. They'll watch a video and go, "Oh, cool, I'll move on to the next one." So there's nothing wrong with that. You can work through the whole course very quickly, just to get an idea of what you're supposed to be doing, and then start again, and then just work on each bit individually. I think that's probably the best way to do it. That way you feel like you're getting a little bit more of your money's worth. Because if you're stuck on one, the second lesson for a year, you'll feel like you wasted your money. Is it Chichero, Tilly? Great to see you doing this live chat. Thank you for taking the time out. I was wondering if you ever read on basses with more extended range, say a 5-string. I don't have a 5-string part for the sight reading course yet, but I will be putting that in as an addendum at one point because the principles are exactly the same. So the lessons, the videos can be exactly the same, but the material, I'll just need additional bits for 5. And certainly for 6, it'll be some extra bits. Do you think it would be useful to include notation at the bottom of the screen on your online lessons? I often do. I don't know which ones you mean. I mean, I've been doing it more often over the past year or so. Remember, I've got 6 years of lessons. There's over 300 lessons on there. I think what can sometimes happen is that some people will see a bunch of lessons by me that might be from 5 years ago when I was doing it very differently. The lessons that I do now have nothing. They're nothing like the ones I originally did, apart from maybe the background. I present them differently. They look completely different. I've got completely different cameras and all kinds of stuff. So you might be just thinking of the some of the older videos. Scott says, what throws me off is going from treble clef from high school trumpet days to bass, clef playing around with the bass as a hobby. Yes, that's exactly what I was mentioning earlier on, that you build up muscle memory for it. That's why, just because you can read treble clef on a piano, let's say, or even bass clef, if you can read bass clef on a piano, it does not necessarily mean that it'll transfer to bass that easily. You still got to know where the notes are on the neck, and you still have to build up that I say muscle memory, but that connection. You got to build up that connection between the page and the instrument. Need some slap lessons. There's plenty of those on the on Talkingbass. I've got a full course devoted to that, but there's plenty of slap lessons. So just go to Talkingbass, go to the lesson map, look up slap. There's plenty in there. Chutma Van Dyne says, I'm new. What is this? It's a class on reading. Well, it's just a live stream, but this one's about reading. Trevor says, getting frustrated with the time it's taking me, but got to be good for me at my age. Yeah, I mean, it does take time, but I've got to say, the more time you put in, it does pay dividends. I can't remember how quick I got down that first position, but it wasn't that long, but I was practicing a hell of a lot. I was spending quite a few hours not just doing pitch reading exercises, obviously, but I was practicing other things as well. But I mean, there's other things that you can do supplementary to this, like just working out. I mean, if you were to get like a Bach cello suite and try working it out, you wouldn't be able to read it straight off if you're a beginner reader, but you might be able, just from the knowledge that you get from the first few lessons of knowing what the notes are on the stave and just what you're looking at, you'd be able to start working stuff out very slowly and piecing it together, and everything helps. But the lessons in the sight reading course are kind of, it's more of a methodology. So it's just a set of exercises that will just work for you, rather than having to try and work out pieces, one note at a time. going to go back up a little bit again. uh, Are you doing lessons? I don't do Skype lessons at the moment. I've had quite a few people asking about that. I had to stop doing Skype lessons because I was because Talkingbass just got too big for me to handle. Basically, I was doing Skype lessons a lot at first, and that's how Talkingbass started. It was only as a vehicle for me to actually get my face out there so that I can start doing some private tuition. I mean, I've told that story a million times. It was when we had our first daughter, and I didn't want to be going away on tour or anything like that again. So I just wanted to stay at home, basically, and I wanted to start teaching. And I needed to find a way of doing it, and that was, putting videos of me teaching on YouTube. And then gradually it started to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and before I knew it, I got some students at first, but then it got too big, and I didn't have time to be doing the teaching. So that's why I started doing the courses and all of that stuff, putting all of the stuff that I would normally do in Skype lessons into lessons that you can buy off the site. And I mean, in terms of value for money, I mean, I've got to say, doing the courses like that, the value for money is just completely off the charts. I mean, you've got to remember, I mean, and I'm not just saying this about me, I'm saying this about everybody that does courses, from Scott to Joe Hubbard to Jeff Berlin to Yannick to everybody. There's tons of people out there putting out courses. And you just think about what you're getting with that. If you can be paying anything from like $20 up to like $100 for one-on-one tuition. You just for a half hour or an hour lesson. It doesn't take long to knock that up to about $500, $1,000, £2,000, dollars, whatever. If you're having lessons for a year, that's a fair bit of money that you pay out. And then you get these courses, like some of these ones, like the ones that I've done there. You get so much knowledge and information in those things, and that gives you so much stuff that you can be practicing it for years. Literally years of practice, which you just wouldn't be able to get with one-on-one. Now, I'm not putting down one-on-one tuition necessarily, because you get something out of one-on-one tuition that you can't get from just watching an automated course, obviously, because it's all, like if I'm doing a Skype lesson, I can sit there, I can watch what you're doing and go, look, no, you're doing this. You've got this constant back and forth, this constant updating. As you're moving your fingers, I can see what they are and say, no, that finger needs to go there, your technique's bad here, whatever, all of that kind of stuff. So one-on-one tuition is great, but in terms of value for money, in terms of being able to have a lot of practice material for a certain amount of time, I mean, courses are pretty good these days. I wish I'd have been able to get these when I was starting. Hi, Pam. Pam's one of my sight readers there. Do you pick the position based on the key of the song you're sight reading? No, not necessarily. The position will be based around the kind of average area of the notes, right? The kind of span of the notes, the register that it's going to be in. Now, a lot of bass lines are going to stick around down here, but some of them might be further up here, and some of them might be further up here. So you can look at what the general, if you were to quickly look at a piece of music, if you've got to sight read it, let's say, you kind of look at what where the majority of the notes are going to be, and then you kind of base your position on that. And then if you have the time, which you don't always have, but if you've got the time, you can plan your positions out before. So you can think, okay, well, that verse is going down here, and then there's this fill, so I need to work my way up there, and you can kind of plan it out. But no, you don't have to base it on the key, because you need to learn each key in each position. So you need to be able to know that when you're playing, let's say, in F, that set of notes in that first position changes, so it's got a B flat in it. So F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C. Okay, so the set of notes in that position, it's like you get a little pattern. So there's the F pattern, and then the B flat pattern, and the E flat pattern, and you learn your keys. But like I said, I didn't want to touch on keys in this lesson today, because it's a big rabbit hole. You've got to go through. Yeah, I won't touch on it too much. But I do talk about that a lot in the Simple Steps to Sight Reading. So there's 30% off on the sight reading course over at Talkingbass. I've put a link, by the way, in the comments below this video. So if you're wanting to check it out, you don't have to buy it necessarily. Just go check it out, see what it's all about. Should I tap my foot or metronome? Just tap your foot to begin with. I never used a metronome when I started doing it. I do have a metronome on the, on the course. I say it's a metronome. It's not a metronome. It's just a click so that you know where the time is. Because I've recorded the actual bass lines that are there, so you can compare. So you play along with it, and it's the music that's up there on screen. You can hear what the bass line is, and there's a click going while you're playing it. But you don't have to do it with a metronome. Just tap the foot. You won't have a metronome when you're playing on stage, You need to sort of develop a sense of timing, really, an internal sense of timing. Paul says, how much time per day is right to dedicate to sight reading? Completely up to you. I would say that you want to put in at least 10 minutes. I mean, you can actually get through quite a bit of reading in 10 minutes if you do it right. Half an hour is even better. An hour is really good. I don't really think most people are going to do more than an hour's sight reading. It's quite labor intensive, really. I'd say in between 10 minutes and half an hour would mean that you're going to get some good, if you're doing that every day, 10 minutes to half an hour. Remember, I'm a realist with all of this stuff. I'm not one of those dudes that says, right, okay, well, you need to get a practice routine. You need to do this and do this and do this. I just know that doesn't work. People can have all the best will in the world, but and I've said this so many times, practice routines. When people sit there and they get a diary and they work out a practice routine, and it's like, I'm going to do scales for half an hour. I'm going to do arpeggios for half an hour, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You might start doing that for a day, 2 days, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 6 months. Are you really going to be 6 months down the line? Are you really going to be following that diary? A year down the line, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, are you going to be following that? No, you're not. At what point do you stop? Let's say that you've got 20 years down the line at one extreme and 1 day at the other. At some point during all of that, you're going to stop doing that practice schedule. So I think it's better to just think, okay, don't worry about scheduling all this stuff. Just focus on one thing and just find the time in the week. Because I know what it's like to have kids. I know what it's like to have a job and have kids and have hardly any time in the day, right? So sometimes for some people, or a lot of times for a lot of people, you just don't have the time. You don't have to, like when I was at music college, I had all the time, all day. All day. I'd get up, I'd be practicing before I even went in, then I'd go in, I'd be practicing all day while I'm there, or studying, we'd be doing whatever the classes were, harmony, arranging, etc. And then I'd come home and I'd either write an essay, which again, you could consider a part of study, and then I'd be practicing. So I'd be practicing all day. So if you think about the immersion in music study, if you're at music college, you're doing it all day, right? You haven't got that luxury when you've got a job and you've got kids and you've got to, you've got other routines and responsibilities to deal with. So I just know that people ain't going to do it. So you just have to find the time. And then if you get the time, 10 minutes of reading will get you started. And then what happens is that after a certain amount of time, you think, okay, I'm actually developing here. You'll start to see differences. And as Pam Anders, that I've heard her talking about this. One of the customers, one of the talking basses that was just here in the comments. She was mentioning in the study group maybe a week ago, talking about how she has completely changed with her playing. She's started to realize what happens when you do this, and about how much more comfortable you are with the actual fretboard. And, she's run into a few obstacles and stuff, as we all do. you'll start to think, okay, this is working, and then it'll plateau, and then you'll start to get a downer, and then it'll be like, oh no, but now I'm learning again, and then it'll plateau, and then you'll go on a downer, and then, you've got that constant peaks and troughs thing going on. But, yeah, anyway. Does reading also tell you when to play legato or staccato? Yes. Anything you can possibly imagine hearing in music is usually able to be written, even if it takes a lot of weird stuff to actually write it. So even the craziest things you can imagine, you can generally write out. I mean, any rhythms you can write out, because any kind of distance between any two notes is only a space in time, and so that can all be done mathematically, and as long as you impose a tempo on something, you can work out where things are relative to that pulse. So anything, absolutely anything. Staccato notes, it's dead easy. It's a little dot. You stick it above the note. Legato, you use slur markings. So it looks like a tie, and you put it over the notes there as phrase markings. As a beginner, this is Ahmed. As a beginner to reading, does it make sense to print out the transcription of a song and write down the names of the notes and try to play the song in that way? All that'll do is help with identifying the notes. It won't really help with your reading on pitch. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's way better to actually see the note, find the note, kind of thing. Davey504 is live. I bet it's a world away from this one. Oh, hold on. I've gone too far up, haven't I? That was way earlier. Right, let me come back up a little bit. I'll try and whip through these, because I'm going to have to get off in a minute. Right, I'm going to come right down the bottom, and then I'm just going to whip up. It's really difficult, this, actually, working out which comments to answer. Oh, Charles says, Mark, would you please explain a little more about your raise principle? I mean, how would you advise to divide practice time between each topic? So for any of you that don't know, I kind of came up with this acronym that helps with figuring out what you might want to study in music. So, and it's RAISE, R-A-I-S-E. So R stands for reading, A stands for applied harmony, I stands for improvisation, S stands for style, and then E stands for ear training. Now, the thinking behind this is that if you use each one of those aspects of study, you practice them, it should be a good pathway to becoming a professional musician. So, reading, so that is not just reading notes on the bass, reading sheet music, it's also reading chord charts. So that's another important skill that you're going to have to master. Just because you can read, sheet music, standard notation, doesn't mean that you can read chord charts. So, bit of everything there. So, then applied harmony is basically harmony. So that could be anything from intervals, scales, arpeggios, chord tones, through to chord progressions, the study of functional harmony, and how all of that works, how chord progressions work. Knowing that that's a 1-6-2-5, and knowing how each of those chords work and what they are, and just the whole bit. Learning that. So that's a 2-5-1 with a tritone substitution on the 5 and then down. Just learning what all these chord progressions are. Just being able to analyze chord progressions. And all of that good stuff. So there's a lot of that. I mean, basically the A stands for music theory. Useful music theory, that is. So then I is improvisation, which can be, it doesn't necessarily mean soloing. You don't have to be soloing over bebop tunes. It can also mean improvising bass lines. So something as simple as taking a chord chart and then just sitting there. That's improvising. Got a beat. There's a chord progression. Let's say C, F, and G. Most basic bass line you could ever play, but it's improvised. I just came up with something, and you can take that to whatever level. So coming up with bass lines, coming up with walking, just playing walking bass lines through chord progressions, all of that stuff. Just being creative, practicing that. S style is learning the correct way to play in certain styles. So knowing how to play a walking bass line in a jazz style, learning how to play in a reggae style, learning how to play in a Latin style, or whatever, a rock style, a metal style, whatever. Just knowing the appropriate kind of general idiosyncrasies and characteristics of that style. Because if you were to turn around to a death metal, somebody that only plays death metal, and then say, okay, well, we've got a country and western band down the way, can you just dep with that? And then they came to playing it. Their approach to playing, if they're not used to understanding what the little characteristics of that style will be, they just make a fool of themselves. And vice versa. If you have only ever played country and western, and then you end up playing in a, some death metal band, well, you're probably not going to be used to all of the stuff, even if you're technically good enough. Even if, either way, you've got the technique, you've got everything there, but you still have to know the kind of stylistic quirks of a style. So, and that includes, just learning how to slap. Like I say, walking bass line. There are certain little technical things in there that need to be applied. Playing staccato, if like just playing staccato notes in there. Learning to do that instead of, just playing held notes or whatever. Just learning. That can make the difference when you're playing in a certain style. So that's the S, and then for E, ear training, that's just developing your ear. So that can be anything from learning solfege, like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and then learning, how all of that works, and also transcription. And I would say that transcription is the way to go. Just transcribing bass lines, transcribing melodies, transcribing all of that stuff. Now, if you take all of that raise thing, and then you use each of those as a little point of focus, you can develop practice time based off that. So then if you think, okay, what am I going to practice today? Okay, today I'm going to concentrate on R. So today I'm going to read. Now I would say that you shouldn't really just think, okay, R on a Monday, A on a Tuesday, nothing like that. I'd focus on a particular thing until you've got over that initial hump, as I was talking about earlier on. If you start off reading, if you don't keep it up consecutively over a few days, you're gonna lose both confidence in it. You're not gonna develop, and you're gonna lose heart in the whole thing. So you really want to be doing it day after day after day after day for a few weeks at least to get over that initial hurdle. Now then you can try doing other things, and you can be doing other stuff at the same time. But I would definitely say focus on one thing for a while if you're new to it. Like now, if I want to practice some reading, I don't have to, even worry about it. It's like, okay, well, I'll practice some reading, and I'm not going to have. It's not like there's a load of new stuff that I need to be thinking. Oh, I need to work on this. I need to work on that. You just start reading. But when you're a beginner, it's all new. So yeah. All right, let me come down a little bit more. How do you practice swing rhythm when reading music? Well, when you see swing stuff, you'll usually have, not always, but a lot of the time you'll have this little symbol that's like 2 eighth notes, and then it'll say equals, and then you'll have quarter note, eighth note with a little triplet above, which basically means that every time you see 1 and 2 and 3, and as in eighth notes, you're to play them swung. You might also see them as dotted 8th note, 16th note. There's a bunch of different ways of notating swing. And you have to kind of get used to it all, because you'll see them all the time. You'll see combinations of them as well. Thanks, everybody, for all the nice comments. Reading music has always been my weak point. That's from Shilly Game Gumi. Yep, it's most people's weak point. I'm trying to slap and I can do basic. This is Max Janssen. I'm trying to slap and I can do basic, but how do I mute the E and the A string? Do you mean muting in terms of stopping it from making a noise? It might be worth checking out my the things where I talk about home position. In fact, my slap course, I talk about this a lot. But basically, keeping these fingers here locked down onto the E strings. I don't mean pushing them down, but if I'm going... When I play like this, these fingers here are locking down the E. Doesn't matter what I'm playing. Now, when I play that, I'm actually using the thumb to come round, but I'm always going back to this position of silence. Okay, so that's muting there, and if I want to play ghost notes, see, I just do exactly the same thing. That's what I call home position. And if you're meaning, whoops, all that kind of jazz. I mean, again, that's the flappy hand thing. You see what's happening there? I'm hitting it with the palm. But I don't think that's what you meant. How often do you actually play chords versus major scales? Well, chord tones in terms of arpeggios, because that's what arpeggios are. They're actually chords played one note at a time. You play those a lot more than major scales. You play them on everything that you play. Everything that you play can be analyzed harmonically, so it's all kind of chord tones a lot of the time, and things that move around chord tones. But if you mean, chords like this, well, in normal bass lines, you don't play them that often. You might play more, that kind of thing every now and then. There's a bunch of different tunes that use actual chords, but not that many, and certainly not full triads. But it's. I did a full lesson on this last week about why. In fact, go back to Friday's lesson from Talking Bass, and you'll see I did a full breakdown of why you would want to learn chords. So I won't waste time actually talking about it now, but go check that out, and I have a full lesson devoted to it. Why did they get rid of that? Andrea says, my music teacher has told me to fine adjust my left-hand technique. Do you got any tips? I wouldn't be able to give you many tips on that without seeing what your hand looks like. That's the problem. That's why one-on-one tuition is always really good, because I'd instantly be able to say that needs doing. But even with pretty good descriptions, it's really difficult, because there can always be like one tiny little thing that you're doing wrong, and then it's like you change that, and then it's like, oh, light bulb moment. I can play everything. Do you still offer monthly subscription? Yes, I do, but it's only on offer once every quarter. So there's like a 2-week window, purchase window every quarter. So it's not on sale at the moment. Because if it is, it kind of... I won't bore you with it, but from a marketing standpoint, and from not just marketing, from an actual just the whole website and just the whole thing. If I've got that going on while I've got course releases going on, there's conflicts. It gets all really confusing. So I just don't... I only release it every now and then. I didn't really want to do that much of a monthly subscription. I was kind of not pressured into it, but I thought it might be a good option. And then I had quite a few people sign up to it, and now I'm kind of stuck with it. But I actually prefer the actual courses, because there's things you don't get with the monthly subscription. You don't get full access, even though it's called the All Access Pass. You can't download anything. So you can only watch the videos streaming on the site and with all the lesson materials below it, but you can't download it on the All Access Pass. That's the trade-off. So it's like a cheap way of seeing what the courses you can get. But like, let's say for the sight reading course, it's not if you get the All Access Pass just to do the sight reading course, you're probably going to waste your money because you really want to be downloading the stuff and printing it out. I know that just sounds like me saying, like, don't buy my stuff in terms of the All Access Pass, but I'd rather tell you now before you waste your money. I'm guessing you can eventually read sheet music like reading the news. Yeah, pretty much. It's not much different. There's not much different. In fact, there's no difference. There's no difference between reading music and reading a book. Reading written language. In some ways, written language can actually be trickier sometimes. Like I said, there's only so many notes on a neck. There's way more words than there are notes on this bass neck. Right, so I'll just be 5 minutes or so. I've not had anything to eat yet. I'm starving. And we'll be putting we're not putting kids to bed yet, but we'll be getting up. We're getting close to the bedtime routine soon enough. Thanks, Antonio. Your simple reading course is excellent. I'm working on Volume 1. What's the main curriculum in Volume 2? In Volume 2, it works on eighth notes and all the different variations on that. So quarter notes are the sort of fastest rhythms that you do in Volume 1. But in Volume 2, you move on to eighth notes and a bunch of different time signatures and a whole bunch of different keys. It's same again, but it just gets trickier each time. Well, it shouldn't feel any trickier. It's just that, it's more it's progressive, Is there ever a time you have to look at the fretboard? That's Marcus M. At what level of learning should you stop looking at the fretboard? I'll look at the fretboard sometimes if I have to, like, you'll see me if I look at so I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to play a C major scale. So I'll get an idea of where. I only have to glance and I'll know where it is. But once you're somewhere like that, you could just kind of work out where you are from. I'm just playing around on a C major scale here, just as an example. See, just working around a scale like that, you get used to certain position shifts. So if I'm working up some notes there, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, if I'm not looking, you kind of get used to that position shift there. I used to practice that actually, because that used to happen a lot when I was reading, and it used to bug me if I was like if it was like a walking bass line, it was working up and I'd ended up here somehow, and then I had to move up into this position. Sometimes I'd have to look down, and I always dreaded looking away from the music, so I'd practice doing that shift there between the 5th fret and the 7th fret, 4th finger to 1st finger, just because I knew that was a pretty tricky move. But you just get used to various position shifts then. So it's not at any one particular level, it's just that over a period of time you just don't have to look at it. Once you've got one note like that, like a C, there's an E, there's a D, G, A, F, E, B, C, C, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Yeah, okay, so I'm just working up with position shifts, like one note at a time. Now, if there's like a big jump, so if I was up here and then I had to jump, I had to do something like that, then I'd obviously want to look down, So bigger shifts you've got to look, but you only should have to glance. Max886, if you could recommend what should be a first bass pedal for a beginner to buy. I don't think there's any one particular pedal. I mean, I don't. I've gone for years hardly ever using effects ever on stage. There's just no point unless it's. Don't just buy pedals for the sake of it. Only buy a pedal if there's a need for it. So if you're gonna if you were playing in a Muse tribute band or something like that, obviously you're gonna have to start looking for the right stuff. But you can. You don't need pedals. Unless you need pedals, right? So it's like when people say, "Oh, I'm gonna buy this bass," and then what's a good pickup to put in it? Because they kind of feel like they want to mod stuff, but it's like, don't mod your bass unless there's a reason for doing it. Like I haven't got it here, but my I've talked about this before. My Fender Jazz, my Marcus Miller signature, is modded to hell because it needed to be, because I needed a hip shot detuner at one point, so I got that put on. I got hum cancelling pickups because I was playing on stages with damned lighting that was causing all kinds of buzzers. I needed a preamp that had got a parametric mid on it because of the particular setup in this theatre show that I was playing. I needed because I was going DI pre the amplifier. There was a certain point at which I really wanted to be able to switch the bass up. I just wanted to move the mid up slightly to cut through, and so I wanted it on board. So that was another thing, and it just goes down the line. So don't just pimp your bass for nothing. But probably the most useful would maybe be right. It depends on what the rest of your gear is. I mean, a graphic could actually be quite useful if you haven't got much going on your amp. If you preamp, if you haven't got active and you haven't got many tone controls on your amp, then a graphic actually would come in handy, or a parametric EQ, because it just give you more tone shaping facilities, or a preamp pedal. So a DI preamp kind of pedal, they're always good. A tuner pedal, certainly. That would be the first thing that I'd get if I were building one up. Maybe it depends on what kind of styles you're going to be playing as well. Like an SVT simulator can often be quite useful. You know, like the Tech 21 VT bass, they can be useful. If you're in a metal band, then like a Dark Tubes kind of thing, like a distortion pedal. Chorus is always cool. If you're going to be doing solo pieces, a reverb pedal or a delay would probably be handy. And if you and for a bit of variation on your practice, then a looper. But it's really difficult to say what's the first one that you should buy, because it depends on the stuff that you're playing and your situation. I've only bought a ton of pedals because I sort of use them for various things that I do with Talking Bass. If it wasn't for that, I probably still wouldn't have hardly any of them. Garrett O'Malley says, I have all access, but ended up buying Sight Reading Chord Tone Essentials and the new chords course. Definitely worth it. Also planned on buying more when I master those. And that, I'm guessing, was because you wanted to download the material. That's one of the main reasons for buying them over the All Access Pass. Question, did you install the sim pickups on your Ibanez yourself? What did it cost? No, Martin put them in for me. Martin Sims. We were trying to think of a way of... because I wanted to demonstrate his pickups. I wanted to be able to, show them to people because I'm really impressed by them. So he came up with the idea of putting them on the Ibanez. So it demands routing out, and because they're an odd shape, they're quite big. So you have to have it all routed out. So he did all of that for me. What can I practice away from my bass? Spelling drills. That's always a good thing. Spelling drills. So take things like arpeggios and scales and practice just saying through the notes. C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Obviously, C major scale. F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F for F major. Or if you went through like D major, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp. E major, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp. Working through them like that. Chords, C, E, G for C major, D, F sharp, A for D major, E, G sharp, B for E major, F, A, C for F major, G, B, D for G major, A, C sharp, E for A major, B, D sharp, F sharp for B major. Stuff like that, just going through a bunch of different chords, scales, whatever. I mean, you could always do these kind of things. Just going through finger independence exercises and, all this kind of stuff. All that kind of gubbins. Okay, so last few questions. Sanjeev's from Nepal. Hello there. I know a way to pimp a bass's bass. Change the strings. Yeah, that'll always do you well if you want to slap. Mark, would you recommend using the Building Walking Bass Lines by Ed Friedland to learn how to walk? Yeah, it's a good book. I've got that somewhere. I might even have it over there. Yeah, I was a big fan of Ed Friedland's books when I was, learning a long time ago. I mean, I'm still learning now, obviously, but yeah, when I was getting started with stuff like that. My the Walking Basslines course, Talking Bass, is another huge course and very, very similar to, to be fair, most ways of teaching Walking Basslines will be very similar to the way that Ed has written it in his book. It's kind of the standard go-to way of actually teaching it, starting with two feel, just working through, chord. Just doing two feel and then and then just moving into walking, using chord tones, then chromatic scales, all that stuff. So the way I teach it is pretty much the same. Are detuners useful? Do they work good? I had a hipshot detuner on my... Oh, there's one there on my Ibanez. Yeah, it depends. Again, it depends what you're going to be doing. I was having to do some detuning very quickly on segues between songs on stage, and that's why I got them. But if I wasn't doing that, then I wouldn't have got one. Do you want a record player? I don't think I do anymore. I used to do. My dad's still got one. I want to get another one, though. I've got a ton of vinyl. Like, most of my albums up till, 2000 or something. I've got hundreds of vinyl records. They're all at my mum and dad's, actually. They're all at my parents' place up in their loft. I've just never bothered taking them, And I need to get them, really, and get a record deck again. What's the basic setup I need to record my bass to a PC? Well, you need a little interface. You can use the Scarlett Focusrite ones. They're pretty good. I use a Steinberg UR22, and that's pretty good. And they're just USB. They go in, and then you have to select all the stuff. I mean, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because you're going to run into driver issues. There's going to be a whole can of worms opens up when you start doing that. But that's what you need. You need an interface to be able to go into your computer. And then you need something that you can use to actually read that. So either a DAW like Cubase or Logic or Pro Tools or something like that. Or any kind of sound recorder thing. Psycho GameTube says Davey504. Is Davey still is he still live streaming? What's he live streaming as well? He's doing some crazy thing. Like a 6-hour slapathon or something. How many basses do you have? About 13, I think. Pinky training exercise. That's one thing you can do. There's a little exercise that I've done it on one of the videos where, let's say you start on the 5th fret of the E string there. Just use 2 fingers for this to start off with. 1, 2, 1, 2, just working across like that. Come up a fret. So you go up from the A up to the C, up to the D flat, really there. So set 5th fret up to about the 9th fret, working up 1, and you can just do it with hammer-ons, and then move to the 2nd and 3rd finger. Same thing again, and then use the 3rd and 4th finger. Oops. Not used to doing it on a precision with the thick. I don't know, I've got to put my thumb in the back. I've never tried this on a precision, and because it's got a thicker neck, you have to be careful where you put your thumb. And so that'll work your hands. Give that one a try, and then try that with hammer-ons. What kind of gigs would you say require you to play walking bass lines the most? I'd definitely be interested in trying to find them and play some of those gigs. Jazz gigs and cruise gigs. Cruise line gigs. You'll be doing them all night. Blooming ballroom. As soon as you start doing ballroom dance stuff, if you're doing quick steps, foxtrots, all that stuff, you'll be playing walking bass lines. Is it wrong to practice a reading exercise repetitively? That would not be strictly sight reading. And that's right. That's why I've put a ton of stuff in the sight reading course so that you don't get sick of it. What you do with that, especially on the random stuff, is just start at different staves, so that you don't get too caught up in that. And it's true. When I used to be in various bands, especially those ship bands where we were doing lots of reading, we had... if we were playing the same tune quite a bit, it's not sight reading anymore. But yet you still can't play it without reading it. If it's something you don't know, there'd be certain songs where they'd call them out, and if I didn't have the music there, I'd be like, oh man, I can't remember it. And I might have read it like 20 times. But it's just, it kind of goes in the eye and out through the fingers, and you just don't retain any of it. It's weird. But yet it's still not sight reading, because as soon as you put it in front of you, it's familiar. It's a really weird feeling. But it's not a weird feeling. It's just a weird thing. It's like short-term memory versus long-term memory. Davey's slapping until coronavirus ends. Oh, blimey. What's your favourite bass and which has the best all-round tone? I love my Fender P basses. I love this P bass. I mean, P basses and precisions and jazz, they both are very different. So neither's. I don't see any of them as better than the other, to be honest. A really nice P bass is a really nice P bass. A really nice jazz is a really nice jazz. I won't bother plugging it in, but here's the jazz bass that I bought not too long ago. So this is a 1968 Fender Jazz, and it's a beauty. So this is an original. This is but it needs looking at. The fret, I think it's the 2nd or 3rd fret, is just absolutely hammered. So, but oh man, the neck. Check this out. If I turn it round, look at the neck on that. That thing is beaten, and it feels like a tree. I mean, it's a thin neck, but it feels like old wood. It feels like a table leg, from from the 17th century. It's a really nice bass, though. It plays beautiful. It sounds awesome. But as soon as the lockdown ends and I can manage to get the neck sorted out, I'll be playing that on a few videos. I won't spoil it for you by playing it and having buzz all over the place. Which of your courses would you recommend an intermediate player to start with? What courses would you recommend after that? Chord Tone Essentials. Chord Tone Essentials is the kind of the course that I think of as being the most useful from a music theory perspective, but also in terms of an application perspective. It's the kind of missing link between music theory and application, because there's a certain way that you can use chord tones. You know, it's all well and good learning what arpeggios are, learning that, learning that's a C major 7, but actually knowing how to apply them is really different. Oh, I rarely see that P bass in your lessons. No, I've used this quite a bit. Have you been involved in any bass duets with anybody? Me and Ari and Cap are working on one right now. Oh, bass duels? No, not really. I don't think I'd ever be. But oh, so immature. No, I'm not bothered about having bass duels. Can you make a video about your bass collections? Yes, I am going to do one. A friend of mine said the other day, says you ought to do a one on all your basses, and I think I will. I wouldn't call it a collection. I haven't got that many. Most of them I don't use that often. But the Ibanez is probably it's the second oldest one I've got. I bought that in 1992, I think. The only one I've got older than, I say oldest, I mean the one I've had the longest. I've got a Westone Thunderjet that I think was my first one, which I think was 1990. So that one's over at the unit. I'm at home at the moment. So there's the Ibanez. I've got 2 Fender Jazzers. No, I've got 3 Fender Jazzers. I've got the Marcus Miller. I've got that greeny looking thing that's got flats on it. And then I've got this new one. I've got the Enfield Lionheart, that purpley looking one. That's amazing. I've got this P bass. I've got the 58 reissue P bass, which is crazy. It's really nice, but it's got one hell of a wide neck. And I've got some others, but I can't remember which ones now. I've got a Kayla U bass as well, obviously. What do you think of Dingwall? I like them, but I'm not that keen on the fan fret thing. But I think I need to sit with them for a while. What are some of the most memorable experiences you've had on cruise ship gigs? Have you almost fallen over or had an impossible piece to read? What level of reading would be required for cruising? That is one hell of a question, that, in terms of a rabbit hole that I could go down. So I've had a lot of memorable experiences. Have you ever almost fallen over? Do you mean overboard? I've almost fallen over. I have fallen over. I've fallen over several times, and not just from drinking. I'll tell you one time that was weird. That I fell over on stage, but we all fell over. It was 2003, and it would have been sometime around Christmas, because the tsunami had just happened, the Asian tsunami. So yeah, that was Boxing Day 2003, or was it 2004? Sorry, 2004. So it was Boxing Day. We were on a ship called Oceana, and we were out in the Caribbean. And when that tsunami happened, remember that a lot of our crew are all Asian, so there'd be a lot of Filipinos. There were people from Sri Lanka, there were people from India, there were people from all over around there, Indonesia. And of course, when that happened, you can imagine, so like 250,000 people died. So there was just like this mass panic set in with a lot of the crew. And we were watching all this thing unfold. Anyway, all happened. And then about 2 or 3 days later, maybe a day, I can't remember exactly when it was, 1-2 days later, whenever it was, we were backing a cabaret in the lounge at the back, and it was a comedian. He's a well-known comedian from England. He's I can't remember his damn name now. I'll remember it later. Anyway, we're backing this guy, and all of a sudden, I mean, it was a mill pond. I mean, it was really, really nice weather. I mean, you'd walk outside. All you had to do was go out of the back and then have a look around. And it was just an absolute mill pond, middle of the Caribbean, right? So it was about 10 o'clock at night. We were all stood there. And then all of a sudden, all the glasses behind the bar went flying, smashed. The whole thing did this. I fell clean over my bass amp. Drum kit started moving, everything. Piano started to roll, everything. Boom. And then came back. And we're like, what the hell? It was just like this sudden lurch. And what we think it was, and I mean, I might be off on this, but when the tsunami happened, it sent out this massive shockwave all around the world, and it actually affected every single ocean. And there were, I think it was an officer that had said it, that I think it was the so because obviously when you get hit by a tsunami when you're at sea, it doesn't have that effect. It doesn't bash you. You just go over this little sort of lip, and they thought it might have been the actual shockwave of the tsunami actually reaching us because we were on the other side of the world. So it had just finally hit us, and then we had this bump. And then I went back outside. I thought, oh man, what was that? Because I've got hit by freak waves loads of times. We've had like 40, 50-foot waves hit us at times, quite often. Well, not quite often. What am I talking about? We've had a few though, and I went outside. Perfect mill pond. So yeah, that was a weird one. But in terms of stories about cruise ships, because I did it for a long, long time, so I've got a lot of funny stories. Obviously, the one that I've talked about loads of times is getting. We got attacked by pirates off the coast of. Well, it wasn't off the coast of Somalia. It was Somali pirates, but we got attacked off Oman, just on the way to Salalah. And most of you that have seen me a few times will know the story, so I won't bore you with it. And I'm sure that there's a few that you're now thinking that haven't heard it, that are thinking, what? You got attacked by pirates? And you're not going to tell the story, but no, I won't bother. But if you want to hear about that story, actually, I've got that cruise vlog on YouTube, and it's on the website as well. So just look up, I think it's When Pirates Attack. It's one of my cruise vlogs. And I tell the whole story on there, on the ship where it happened, actually. I'd gone back there. So you might find that interesting, if you're into that stuff. Do you talk with other bass teachers like Scott? Yeah, me and Scott have been good friends since about 1998. Or 98, was it? Certainly 99. We both went to college together. We were both on a post-grad in 99. Yeah, and then I continued. I stayed on there teaching. So yeah, we've known each other a long time. We're from the same place. And we meet up every time I go back up home. I live on the Isle of Wight at the moment, near Mark King, funnily enough. And every time I go back up to Leeds, we meet up for curries and stuff. There's a bunch of dudes that do a lot of this online stuff that are all from up in from Leeds. If any of you have ever seen Zoltan Dekeni, he's from there as well. And if any of you are into double bass, discover double bass. Jeff Chalmers, who used to work at SBL, he's another friend of ours. We're a bunch of us that are all friends. Right, okay, well, I'll just make this the last few questions. I'll just very quickly blast through them. What bass do you regret selling? There's an old ESP limited one, a 5-string I had, and that was really nice. I regret selling that. Do you have any recommendations on how to learn complicated slap parts by ear? Not really. You just have to get better at slapping and better at ear training. I know that's a real naff question, but I'm trying to blast through them quick. Right, last few. Here we go. As a beginner, would you recommend a high-end like Ultra Fender bass? Probably not. I don't think it's worth going for super expensive gear or anything over $1,000 if you're just a beginner. It's because you might stop playing, and then, you know. What level of reading will be required for cruisers? It depends on the band that you're playing in. If you're just doing like a covers band kind of thing going on there, not so much. Although that is not always the case, because I've done some of those bands on there, and that's some of the hardest reading I've done. But yeah, you've got to be pretty good. You've got to be pretty good at reading. For any gig, it's not just a cruise gig. Any gig that requires reading means that you have to be able to read whatever it is that they're going to have in that pad easily, because nobody wants you going up on stage and worrying about the reading. It's like if you went for a brain operation and the dude was going to be like panicking about the fact whether he's going to be able to do the brain operation. It's, you know, you've got to make sure that whatever it is that you're going to have, you can do easily, because there are so many other things in a gig that are going to have an effect. You know, that are going to distractions and stuff. In a reading gig, the reading isn't always the biggest problem. You know, you've got other things like looking for the band leader. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Even things like where spotlights might be and stuff like that. You might have a spotlight over there, and it might be. There's a load of stuff that distracts you that can play a part in it all. And that's why you need to be able to do it easily, because while all of that other stuff's going on, all the other distractions and problems, I've had fires break out while in a gig. A fire break out to the side, actually, to the side of the stage while I've been reading, and I'm trying to carry on reading while this fire's starting up. We've had people break their legs and have to keep playing. Actually, play to accompany the blooming medics coming in. That were a bit silly. I've had people die in the crowd. It's there's all kinds of things that can throw you off, you know. And yeah, most of the time, if the fire breaks out, then you're going to stop at some point. But you know, right at that moment when things are going on, you've still got to kind of avoid. I mean, a fire is a bit of a daft example, isn't it? Because you know, if you see a big fire, the last thing you know is keep playing and go, ooh, you know. But you know, there's other things to worry about. Thomas says there's a question. Ever think you and Scott could do a dual interview together? Maybe a little jam session. That would be cool. It'd be nice to do it, but I don't know if he'd bother doing it. I mean, he might. I've said it before, but you know, I'm not too sure that he'd be bothered about doing an interview. Cool. All right, then I'll leave it there. So this has been really cool, and obviously you can all go check out the Simple Steps to Sight Reading course. And if any of you have missed the earlier seminar that I did, then obviously this is going to be up on YouTube, so you can check it out. You know, work through it. And hopefully it'll inspire you to start doing a little bit more reading. And, you know, I've set out a few things that you can actually start doing. And go check out the course. And like I said, I've put 30% off on it. So if you really, really want to get into it, go check it out. Go check out that course. There's a 30% discount if you want to try it and see how it goes. All right, then, everybody. So I'll probably be doing another one of these next week. So hopefully we can make this a bit of a consistent thing during the lockdown. I'll see you all hopefully next week. See you later.